Hello, Jesus Christ. Right, so today we are going to study a Bootstrap course. Right, so here we are. Let me turn on this volume.
My name is Neil Rowe. I run a YouTube channel formerly known as Coder's Guide. And in this course, I'm going to be showing you everything that you need to know to get started using the Bootstrap 4 framework. So Bootstrap 4 is essentially a toolkit for front-end components for your website. So essentially what it does is it takes out all of the hard work, all the tedious work of building responsive sites and provides a whole load of utilities for you to do that so much easier than writing it from scratch. So what actually is Bootstrap? Well, as I say, it's a responsive framework. So you'll see in this example here, the whole of Bootstrap is really based around this one grid system. And the grid system is exactly what you see here. It's where you've got a large screen and you have up to 12 columns in your grid. So in this case, we've got 4 columns in this example. But then when you scale that down to mobile, it just knows how to scale it down and stack them perfectly. This is one of the most powerful, one of the most flexible grid systems that I've seen in any front-end framework, but it also has tons of other features like pre-built components. So on my screen now, you can see like navigation bars, all pre-built, all ready for you to style, and these navigation bars are all collapsible. Everything in Bootstrap is built for mobile. It's all mobile first, and then it scales up for a bigger screen. So you'll see here how we've got this nav bar on a large screen, like a laptop screen, and then you stick that down on mobile and it all collapses, it all tucks away, it all works perfectly. We've also got tons of other components like the buttons are pre-styled, the form elements. Here we've got cards, we've got modals, which are like pop-up windows. So many things that would otherwise have been quite tedious. Like modals, I know you've got to create the background dark overlay and then you've got to pop up and then do the animations, and there's so much work into building a modal, but Bootstrap has it all covered for you. And the nice thing about Bootstrap 4 is how customizable it is. So one of my biggest gripes with Bootstrap 3 back in the day and Bootstrap 2 is that it was a bit tricky to make it your own. I always saw Bootstrap 2 and 3 as prototyping tools, but now Bootstrap 4 is actually a full-fledged framework that you can really customize. You can change pretty much anything about it quite easily. So there are a ton of sites that are using Bootstrap that don't even look like this. They've got their own styling on top of it, and they're just using sort of the responsive framework side of it. We've also got other things like various navigation bars. So these are list groups and pills and tabs. All of those come prepackaged with Bootstrap, which make it a really good prototyping tool. So if you just want to build like a backend for your site and you need a really simple front end just to interact with it, Bootstrap is perfect for that. And if you're looking to build a sort of more fancy front end, Bootstrap is a great sort of starting point to build from. So I hope you stick with me on this course. The full course is on scrimba.com. And the really nice thing about Scrimba, if you're new to it, is that while I'm coding, you can literally just pause the video, edit the code, play around with it, and then go right back to the video and just hit play again. And this all happens within the browser. There's no need to sort of set up your own development environment or anything. You can just go ahead, click pause, and then type right where I'm typing, test your code. It really is a really great concept. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Hey, welcome to the Bootstrap 4 course. This is the first tutorial episode. And in this video, you're going to be looking at the main reason why anyone uses Bootstrap in the first place, and that's for the responsive grid system. So what this basically is it allows us to divide up the width of the page into 12 columns. And you can have more columns if you set it up that way, but usually it's 12. And let's say you're on a desktop, you might want these 12 columns, or let's say 3 columns, to be next to each other horizontally. But then when you scale it down to a mobile, obviously the screen real estate gets narrower. You might want to stack them instead. And the Bootstrap grid system allows us to do this super simply. There's no manual media queries or anything. It's just a few classes we use, and it all does it right out of the box. So for this episode, what I've actually done is I've pre-coded some of the column grid systems that I use in my day-to-day work. I figured it would be better than just you sitting there and watching me hard code or manually code every single one. It just seemed like a waste of time. So I'm going to walk you through all of the different grid systems that I use. So the first one is the most basic one, so I'm going to call it the basic columns. And this is where you've got just two columns. So two columns sitting there right next to each other. And every grid system in Bootstrap, or usually, is surrounded by a row. So we've got a div with a class of row, and that is just a container surrounding these two columns. Inside of it, it's got two columns, and these are made up of the class col for column, and two of those means I've got two columns here. Now, when you use just a basic column like this, col, it will just use whatever space it's got. And if you've got multiple columns, it will divide up all of the width and then divide it by the number of columns there are. So you see here we've got two equally sized columns. If I were to go ahead and add a third column and then refresh, you'd see we get three equally sized columns. There's no like scaling or anything or breakpoints because, as I say, this is just a basic column. And that brings me into the next section. So the next section is set sizes. So right here in the first example, we're using three identically sized columns. But in the second example, we're actually setting sort of fixed sizes for these columns. So remember I said these have to add up to 12. So we've got a 4 column and an 8 column, which adds up to 12. And you see we get a small column and a slightly larger column, or twice the size. If I change this to 3, that adds up to 11, so it's less than 12, so we get a bit of a gap at the end here. And if I set that to 5, which is too big, you see they stack and it kind of all breaks. So these must always add up to 12. And if I wanted to add another column in here, I could do 6 and 2. And you'll see there we get 3 columns of different sizes. All simple stuff so far. Remember how I was talking about breakpoints and how the screen could scale down and they would stack? Well, that brings me to my next section, which I've conveniently titled breakpoints. So here I've got 2 columns and they don't have a set size. They just have this thing here, -sm. And there's multiple of these. You get SM, MD, and LG. So think of it as that is the point on the screen where when you're scaling it down, it's going to break from horizontal to vertical. So basically Bootstrap has SM, MD, LG, and these have set sizes. So as I scale this down, you'll see that right now they're next to each other. But as soon as they go past the SM breakpoint, the small breakpoint, they go to vertical. So they're stacked. Then I bring that back out and they go next to each other again because they've gone bigger than SM. You kind of get used to where these breakpoints are the more you use Bootstrap. So don't worry about remembering the actual number of pixels and things like that. The next example is combining both of those two things, breakpoints and set sizes. So you can sort of mix them up to create this class, column SM4 or column SM6 or 2. And this does exactly what you think it does. We get 3 columns here of different sizes. And then when we bring it down to SM, or XS actually, you'll see they stack and they're all the same width. And then when I bring it back out, they go back to exactly what they were. The next example is no gutters. And you can kind of see what's going on here. There's no padding inside of the columns. So by default, Bootstrap puts some padding here so that, let's say you've got text in all of these columns, they won't be on top of each other. But sometimes we might want to remove that padding. And we can do that with a simple class, no-gutters, on the same level as the row. So the same div that has the row class, add the class of no gutters. Pretty simple stuff. The final example I've got here is offsetting. And you can see what's going on here. There's a gap between the columns. So what we've got here is a 6 column, and we've got a 3 column, and then a gap on the left. And the gap on the left is actually of 3.
I'm trying to build this this app, not a web app called Carless. It's basically it's basically like a nomad list, like but for cars. Right? You find dot class. Let me try it and let's see if it works. So we have a div called. So we have a class. This is row. Let's try it. And then here. try and his will be call xm s2 3 and then call xm 2. Let's do let me see. So would be 9. Go live. It is not working. Let me try this. Call xm. Oh, it should be this one. Call xm. How about that? Doesn't work. Call xm1. Nothing happens. Did I CSS Bootstrap? Why is it not working? Why is it not working? Let's try. We need a class container. Do we need that? Browse style 4.0 integrity. Let me close the door. Let's try. CoXM1. Right, CoXM1, that works. But the image. What about CoXM9? 1 and 9. Supposed to fit, but it doesn't. Let's try it tonight.
So what we got is just a normal column SM6, so a 6 column with a breakpoint at small. And then the next column is a column SM3, which is this column here. But that has an offset of SM3. So what that means is it basically says, on the left of me, I want a gap of 3 columns. And you can see that happening right here. And then because this is SM, we've got a breakpoint. So they just collapse down and there's no gap between them. So that's it for my examples. There's one more thing I want to show you. And for this one, I'm going to manually code it in front of you just so I can walk you through it that way. So let's say I have 4 columns. Now, when I put this on a larger screen, so let me refresh. I've got this on a larger screen now, and here 4 columns works fine. But what about when I make the screen smaller and I want to have it on a 2x2 grid? Well, we could do something like this. So I'm going to create all of these as column 6s, and this is going to create that 2x2 grid. So there you go. You got 2 here, 2 down. But when I change the screen size, it's always a 2x2 grid, regardless of how wide the screen is. If I have a mile wide screen, it's always going to be 2x2. But in this example, I want it to be 2x2 only when the screen is smaller, and then go 4x1 as you get wider. So what we can do is we can sort of mix and match these breakpoints. So I'm going to add a column SM6 here, and then we can add a column MD of 3. And what this is basically going to do is it's going to go on small screens, make them 6 wide, but then on a wider screen, on a medium screen, make them 3 wide. So that would mean that 3 stacks up horizontally 4 times, so you get that 4x1 grid. So if I copy this to all of these elements, and then refresh it, you'll see the 2x2 grid. Let's make it a little bit wider. And there's our 4x1 grid. You can, of course, use these for all of the Bootstrap breakpoints. So these are XS, XL, MD, LG, and XL. So XS right at the bottom, your tiny little phone screens, and then XL all the way up to your big 24-inch monitors.
Right.
So I really just wanted to demonstrate here that you don't have to just use one utility. You can mix and match them. I could have a class here for XL, SM, MD, LG, and XL all the way across if I wanted to. But in this case, anything higher than MD will just be a 4x1 grid, and then anything lower than SM will be a 2x2 grid. All right, so I'm going to leave this one here. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found it useful, and I hope to see you in the next one.
This is useful.
Hey, welcome to the Bootstrap 4 course. This is the first tutorial episode, and in this video, we're going to be looking at the small. All right, so I'm going to leave this one here. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found it useful, and I hope to see you in the next one.
All right, let's move through that video.
Hey, welcome back to the Bootstrap 4 course. In this episode, we're going to be looking at navbars. Now, these are kind of like a staple of Bootstrap. You see them everywhere. They're very similar to Bootstrap 3 and Bootstrap 2. Pretty much the same concept, just that bar that goes along the top with usually a brand on the left and maybe some navigation items. And this episode is kind of going to be the kitchen sink of navbars. So every navbar starts off with the nav tag. You can also use a div, but for the sake of following HTML5 standards, we're going to use the nav tag in the same way that it shows you in the Bootstrap docs. Then give this a class of navbar. And then inside of that, I'm going to give an anchor, so a link, and this is going to be sort of the branding. So I'm going to link that to nowhere and close that off. So this is going to be my website. So now when I run that, you'll see a link and not much else. That's because we need a few more classes here.
Right, so like a navbar, call something. Okay, I can see how.
So I'm going to add a class to this link of navbar-brand. And you'll see that's simply just made the font size bigger, but we've still got no real navbar there, no defined navbar anyway. And the reason for this is because we haven't set a color. So I'm going to go with navbar-light. And when I run that now, you'll see same thing, but now the link has gone black rather than blue. And that's because navbar light is saying that the background is going to be light, so make the text dark so that it sort of shows up against it. Another class we're going to add is bg-light. And when I refresh that now, you'll see it's starting to take shape. You'll see the gray background. You can also have bg dark, which just makes it black. Or sorry, a dark gray rather. But I'm going to go with bg light. And that's it for actually getting our navbar set up. The next thing I want to set up is a navigation bar. So sort of horizontally aligned links along the top. So underneath our anchor, we're going to add an unordered list. And this is going to have a class of navbar nav. And inside of this will be list items. And then inside of that, we'll have links. So these are the actual bits you click on. And I'm going to go homepage, link that to nowhere. When I refresh, you'll see the link going at the top, but it's still not fully styled. There's a few more styles we need to add. So the list items need to have a class of navbar item. And then the anchors need to have a class of navbar link. Or sorry, nav link. So now it's starting to take a little bit more shape again. The link is now gray, so it fits in with the rest of the scheme. So I can go ahead and duplicate that now to create the rest of our links. So we're going to have homepage, blog, about me, and contact. Okay, so you'll see what's happened now is that they've all vertically aligned, and that's because we need to set up the whole collapsing property of this navbar. So what's going to happen is when you put it down to mobile, these links are going to collapse and they're going to go vertically, but the problem is we haven't set that up. So right now it's just going vertically by default. So we can do that. I'm going to wrap my unordered list in a div, and this is going to be the collapsing div. So we're going to give it a class of collapse, and then navbar collapse, and then close that off just after the end of the unordered list. And you'll see that the links have actually now disappeared. That's because we haven't set up the button to toggle the collapse. So a collapsible section is literally just in the name. It disappears on mobile, but then when you click a button, it will open up. Right now it's disappearing everywhere, and we need to sort that. So first things first, I'm going to create a button that's going to trigger that collapse. So just create a pretty basic button. And for the moment, I'm just going to have open as the text, but we'll change that in just a moment. And give that a class of navbar toggler. Then data toggle needs to be collapse for Bootstrap to work. And then the data target is going to be the ID of the collapsing section. So I haven't created one yet, so let's go and add an ID to the collapsing section. So this will be navbar collapse. And then paste that in here with a hash in front of it, and that should be good to go. So let's refresh that now. You get an open button, and you see that's triggering the collapse. So that's perfectly fine on mobile. And then when I bring it wider, it's still there. So we need to solve that. So there's one class we need to add, and that is to the navbar itself, and that is navbar expand LG. And this is basically going to tell it that at the LG breakpoint or less than that, we're going to make it a menu, like a vertical menu, but on large screens, we're going to have it as a horizontal menu. So let's just demonstrate that now. You see on my large screen, on my sort of laptop size screen, iPad size screen, we've got the links sort of going horizontally, and then I'm going to bring that down to mobile, and you'll see it's collapsed, and there's our menu there. A few little things we can do here just to neaten this up a little bit. The open button, we can put like a burger menu in there. So I'm going to replace the open text with a span. And that needs a class of navbar toggler icon. And there you go, you see the burger menu there. Click on it, brings up the menu just as before. One other little thing I want to do is I want to shift the navigation over to the right, and we could do this by adding a left margin of auto. So go ahead and grab the unordered list and add the class of ml-auto, and this stands for margin left auto. When I refresh that, you'll see the navigation goes on the right, but obviously you can have it on the left or the right, it's up to you. But the collapse should all work just as it was before. Perfect. One more little utility I just want to show you is the fixed top utility, which you won't see a difference now, but basically if you scroll down the page, the navbar will stay where it is. It will always be on the screen. All right, I'm going to leave this video here. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something today, and I hope to see you in the next one.
Thank you. Module.
Hey, welcome back to the course. This episode we're focusing on modals. And what are modals? Well, they're these sort of pop-up boxes. They pop up on the screen and they sort of darken the background. And you can have forms in these, or you can have messages. So like you might have your login form in here. You can have pretty much whatever you want in here. So in this episode, we're going to just go through how to create these. So I'm going to strip out all my code so that we can start from the beginning and code this together. So first things first, we're going to need a button that will trigger this modal. So I'm going to create that now, just button, and then I'm going to give it a class of btn-primary. You don't need to do this, I'm just trying to make it look slightly presentable. And then the text, I'm going to go launch modal. Now, obviously, this is going to do nothing at all right now because we need to hook up a modal. So I'm going to create a div. So create a div with a class of modal. And that's all we need for now, so just close that off. And this modal will need a number of sort of nested divs. So we're going to go through this now. So the first one is modal dialog. And here's the thing. So the modal is made up of multiple parts. It's made up of the faded background, and it's made up of the actual dialog that you see. So we don't have to do any code for the overlay for the background because Bootstrap handles that for us. But what we do need to do is create the actual dialog. So the next one is modal dialog. And close that off. And then inside of here, what I'm going to have is a div with a class of modal content.
Modal content. Right.
And then inside of that, I'm just going to put hello world, because there's a few more elements that we can put inside of here, but none of them are required. So I'm going to leave it there. And obviously this isn't going to launch our modal now because we still haven't hooked up the button to this modal. So I'm going to give this modal an ID that we can reference it by of my modal. And then we need to hook that up on the button. So data-toggle. And then here is modal. So we're telling it this button is going to launch a modal. And then we need to tell it which modal. So modal target, data target is equal to my modal. And we need a hash in front of there because it's an ID. So now when I refresh that, you see it is popping up my modal. And it really doesn't look very good. First thing we can add is a fade transition. So this literally just will animate it as it comes in. So you see that, it sort of fades in quite nicely. And then remember what I was saying about adding those extra elements inside of it just to make it look good. So to sort of pad it out. So the first one we can add is a div with a class of modal header. And this does exactly what you think it will do. Then inside of here, I'm going to put heading of heading 5 in this case, and the class of modal title. And then I'm going to stick my title, so hello world. Let's refresh that and open it up. You can see it's starting to look better.
Okay.
It's got some nice padding, the fonts are all right, but it's still not perfect. Next one we're going to add is a modal body. And then I can create a paragraph in there, and I'm going to go lorem ipsum dolor, just to fill that in. And when we refresh now, that's looking so much better. We're actually got all the paddings are right, and it's all looking good. Lastly, I'm going to add another one for modal footer. And then I'm going to stick a button in here, which is going to close the modal. So I'm going to go cancel inside of there and give it a class of btn-primary, and then give it a data-dismiss of modal. So basically what that's saying is it's going to dismiss this modal, like the parent modal. So let's give that a go now, refresh. You can see the cancel button is all styled nicely and it's aligned to the right. Cancel that, and it closes the modal.
Okay. Nice. This is really
One last thing I'm going to do.
Like this streamline a lot of the stuff that I do, like creating a module. That would take like at least 15 minutes if I remember the whole formulas, the whole things. But when I need to do Googles, it might take more, like half an hour, an hour. Depends on how big of a deal of the module is. But this just streamline everything, right?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a close button in the top right, like a little X, which will make it more familiar to the user. And for this, I usually just paste in the code. So I'm going to walk you through what this is going to do now. So paste that in. What I've actually done is I've created a button here with a type of button, and then class is close. This is a Bootstrap generic class, which makes this a close button, is the easiest way to explain that. Data dismiss is modal, and this aria label, this is for accessibility stuff. It's kind of up to you whether you want to use it. Basically, it's for screen readers and various accessibility tools to understand the context of the page. But for these examples, I'm not really getting into that. So I'm going to go ahead and ignore that.
Area label.
But inside of that, we've got a span, and this has got the times icon, which is just a cross. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh, launch the modal, and there you go. You can see our cross there, and when you click on it, we're closing the modal. All right, I don't want to get too much into this, so I'm going to leave this episode here. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.
Form, like how many things that we can do here? Like that's a lot. Let's do form.
Hey, so welcome back to the course. In this episode, we're going to be looking at Bootstrap forms and sort of how we can lay out our buttons and text inputs and all of that to make it all responsive and just look nice across many displays. So this is a form, so it's going to start out just like any other form really in HTML with a form tag. And then I'm going to put some pretty basic stuff. I'm not going to do anything Bootstrap for now, just a pretty basic form. So I'm going to give this a label, and the label is going to say email address, as well as an input type of text. And then I'm going to duplicate this for the password field. So stick password in there and password. And finally, we just need a button with the type of submit. And give it a text of just login now. Okay, so when I load that in the browser, you can see it's looking pretty not great, to be honest. It's looking a little bit Windows XP is the only way I can really describe this. So we can solve that. So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce some Bootstrap classes. Now, the first one we can do is on the button. This is a really simple one, so class. And all Bootstrap buttons have the class of btn. But you can see that if I preview that, it's there and it works, but it's gray. So we can pick the color by going btn hyphen and then giving it one of Bootstrap's color codes. So these are things like primary or success or info or danger and all of those. And they have varying colors. So danger will be red and warning will be yellow, etc., etc. So I'm going to use primary because that seems to make most sense here. And there we go. We've got a blue button. So we're starting to get a little bit away from that boring, plain old HTML form. But there's a few more classes we can add here. So for the inputs, we can straight away go and add a form hyphen control. And I'm going to do this for both of them. And you'll see that makes them wider and pads them a little bit and adds an outline to them and rounds off the edges a bit, starting to look a whole lot better. But you'll still see that we've got an issue with some of the spacing in this form. So this is where some of the structure classes, as I might call them, come into place. So create a div and give this a class of form group and row. So form group is how we're going to tell Bootstrap that this is a form group. That's just a class for it. And then row, because this is going to be made up of columns. Close that off just after the first set of labels and inputs. And when I refresh that, it looks pretty much the same, but now this is slightly wider. And that's just because that's how rows tend to work, the whole grid system. So we're going to add some classes here to set up this grid system. So for the label, we're going to have column SM3, which means that anything lower than SM is going to collapse and become full width. And above SM, it's going to nicely sort of put things next to each other. You'll see in a minute. It's easier to actually show you. All right, moving on. And then for the input, we're going to add a div around it.
So col basically columns. So it has the size of 3. And then one it is
with a class of column MD9. So the input is actually a block element, which means that it's always going to be the full width. So by creating a parent div and setting the width on that, we can sort of limit that down. All right, let's refresh. And you'll see that we're starting to look a little bit better. Suddenly the label is on the left here, and then we've got the field on the right, and they sort of sit next to each other. Let's refresh. Input is actually...
Wait, let me understand this. So row. So col small when it is small. So small 3. So if it's small, then it's 3. Right. So if it's big, this one is. Let's try this. Yeah. So small. This is, I'm assuming this is 3 and 9. 3 and 9. Right, 3 and 9. So when it is smaller than XM, when it's larger than, when it is bigger than XM. Right, got it.
It's actually a block element, which means that it's always going to be the full width. So by creating a parent div and setting the width on that, we can sort of limit that down. All right, let's refresh. And you'll see that we're starting to look a little bit better. Suddenly the label is on the left here, and then we've got the field on the right, and they sort of sit next to each other quite nicely. And then if I switch this down to a mobile size, you will see that it's stacking nicely, because you wouldn't want them next to each other or the inputs would just be too small. So there we have it. A couple more things we need to address though. When I make this wider, the label is out of line, it's slightly too high. We can solve that by adding another class to the label, and this will be column form label, or col form label. Refresh that and you'll see that's lined up quite nicely. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this for the password. So change that back to password and password. And there we have it. One last thing I want to do is line up the login now button with the inputs, because normally it should be around about here. So we could do that by creating another div with a class of row. Stick the button inside that, and actually we need another div inside it for the column. So div class is column SM9, and then we're going to have offset SM3. And what that's going to do is going to create a 9 wide column and offset it 3 so that it's in line with the inputs. And then go ahead and stick the button inside of that. And there we go. That's looking pretty neat now. And when I bring that down, you'll see it all stacks nicely, even the button.
Nice. That's nice.
And I've just noticed that there's this awkward sort of breakpoint here. This is actually the median breakpoint where the button doesn't line up. And the reason for that is just a silly little mistake here. I went for MD by habit. That should actually be SM. Because these should all be SM9 and SM3, just so that they break at small. So go ahead and refresh that. And that makes a whole lot more sense now. One last thing I want to mention, even though it's not super important in this demo, is that when you're using labels, you should really add a for tag to them, or a for attribute, and give an ID to your form control. So let's give this an ID of email and an ID of password. And then the label should have a for attribute of email and password.
Right. Got it.
And all that does is means that you can click on the text here to select the box, to focus the box.
Toggle the ID.
All right, so I'm going to leave this video here. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you got some use out of this, and I hope to see you in the next one. Hey, welcome back to the course. This is going to be a shorter video. In this video, we're going to be looking at list groups. Now, list groups are exactly what you see here. It's like, well, a list of items. And you can do many things with these. You can have them as buttons. So this might be like a sidebar with lots of links. You can add lots of extra content to these to make them like blog posts. So if you want like a sidebar with sort of an extract of each of your blog posts. You can have just a standard list with pills. These are called pills or badges on the side like that. There's so many different things you can do with these, and then you can integrate these into cards, which I'm going to show you in the next video. So let's just go ahead and get started. So what I have is a container, but you can ignore that because I'm just trying to make this look nicer in the video. But inside of here is where we're going to create our list group. So we're going to start off with a div, and we're going to give it a class of list-group. And for the first example, we're going to be using a list of buttons. So it's just going to be like a sidebar almost. So we're going to create some A tags. So these are some links, and these are going to link to nowhere. And then we'll need a class, of course, of list group item. And I'm going to leave it there for now and close off that tag. And we're going to put homepage. So when I refresh that, you can see there it is. There's our first item in the list. Now, if you're happy with that, you can end this video right here. But there's a few more things I want to show you. So let's go ahead and duplicate this. So I'm going to have another one for blog. And I'm going to have another one for contact. Now, it's important to note this isn't a navigation as such, but sometimes it's quite nice to have it in the sidebar. You can use it as you want. So there we go. There's our 3 items. I'm going to add a class to this called list group item action. And you'll see that just makes it gray or black or whatever that is. I think it's like a really dark gray, just to fit in with the theme of the list group. So if you prefer it to look like links, you can have it the way it was before. But if you want it gray, then just add that one in. So I'm going to paste that in for all of them and refresh. There you go. There's also the active class that we can add to it, which shows that this is the currently selected one. So if we're currently on the home page, you'll make this one blue, and you can make any of them active. You should only really have one active at a time though. So I'm going to remove that for the next example, and I'm going to add another one called notifications. And then if you think about on Facebook or Twitter or anywhere like that, you'll always have like a little number to the right of it that will show you how many notifications you have. So in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a span just underneath the text at the same level as the notifications text. And I'm going to stick the number 3 in there. So obviously when I refresh that now, it's not exactly how you want it to look. We want to make it sort of stand out a bit more, have sort of a bold circle around it. And we can do that using a badge. So a badge is literally what I just described. It's just a big bold circle or rounded rectangle rather that goes around it. So give it a class of badge and then badge dash primary. And of course, this color can be any of them. So success or warning or danger, whatever, doesn't really matter. And you'll see we now have sort of a slightly squarish badge. Now this one is more suited for, let's say you've got text in there. So maybe I've got the word new in there. That looks quite good like that. But in this case, we're using a number, so number 3. So I want it rounded. So we can do this by adding badge hyphen pill. And that literally just does exactly what I say it does. It just makes it rounded. Now, one final little thing I want to do is I want to shift this number over to the right just to make it a little bit more readable. So to do this, I'm going to add the utility of d-flex onto my list group item. And what that does is it means display flexbox, which means that the content inside of this flexbox become flexbox items. And then you can use the class, justify content between. And that is a Bootstrap utility. You can find all of these in the Bootstrap documentation, but that literally just separates them out to the sides. So by justifying the content, you put the first thing over to the left and the second thing over to the right. Easiest way to explain it, really. And then you'll see one last thing is that the padding on this badge has kind of become a bit of a mess. So we can use the class align items center, and that's going to vertically center that element so that it just looks a little bit more normal where it's sitting. So that's it for that. One last thing I want to show you is that instead of using these as links, you can also use this as an actual list. So I'm going to change this to an unordered list so I can show you, and then turn all of these elements into list items. I'm just going to remove them all and edit this one. So li and li. That should be closing it off. And you'll see that it looks exactly the same, except now it's functioning as a list rather than links, as you can see. And we don't need the href because obviously these aren't links anymore, so I'll get rid of those. As well as the class list group item action. This is what's giving that hover effect. Because it's not a link, we don't need it anymore. So just go ahead and remove those. They're no longer necessary. And there you go. There's your pretty plain, boring list. Thank you for watching this video. I'm going to leave it here, and I hope to see you in the next one.
Good. I think I can do a lot of this. I can do card as well.
Hey, welcome back to the course. In this episode, we're going to...
Give me a moment. I would take a quick restroom break. Then we will be back.
We're looking at cards. Now, cards are pretty much the same as they were in Bootstrap 2 and 3, except they have a nice new design now. They look a lot more sort of material design if you're familiar with that spec. I quite like it. I think it works well in so many different situations, and they're so sort of flexible, so you can do so many different things with them. And this episode is going to cover most of those things that you can do with cards. So I've pretty much got what they call the kitchen sink of cards at the moment. So this is a card with an image, a title, a paragraph, a list group, and some buttons. And you can kind of see for yourself what it does. There's not really much more to say about it. Now I'm going to go ahead and scrap all of my code so that we can start from scratch with a brand new empty document. So I've got a container, but we can completely ignore that because that's just for the layout purposes for this video. So we're going to start off with a div with a class of card. And when I stick some text in there, you'll be able to see the card. And the first thing you'll notice is that there's no padding whatsoever. And that can be solved using a class called card body. And then now when I stick some text in there, you'll see it's padded out nicely. It's starting to look a bit better. Still a bit boring though, so now we can go ahead and expand on that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a title, and this would be a H5 tag, or in fact any H tag actually. And I'm going to give it a card title of just card title, and I'll give it a class of card-title. Now when I refresh that, you'll see there's the title right there, looking quite good. But what you'll notice is that there's a really mysterious sort of gap underneath it, and that's because headings have a padding at the bottom or a margin at the bottom. So we can add MB-0, margin, bottom 0, and then if I were to refresh that, you'll see that's gone. Now this isn't really important for us because we're going to add a paragraph underneath this. So go ahead and make a paragraph tag and give that a class of card text, which will handle all the padding and the margins for us. So I'm going to go lorem ipsum dolor. When I refresh that, you can see it's starting to look good. We've got a title and a paragraph. And one final thing I'm going to add here is a button. So I'm actually going to create this as a link. So ahref, set that to nowhere. And I'm going to call it button 1. And then I'm going to give it a class of btn-primary. And you'll see there we've got our button. And I could go ahead and create another one if I wanted to, just like that. So I'm going to have button 2. And I'm going to make this BTN default. Perfect. There's our 2 buttons. We could also have BTN warning or BTN danger and all of that. But for now, we're going to stick with the primary. And that's starting to look pretty good. The next thing we can add is an image at the top, like I showed you in the demo. So I'm going to head and outside of the card body, we're going to create an image tag and give it a class of card-img-top. And that's going to create an image that's all sized properly and sticks to the top. Give an alt, so this is the alternate text, and this is going to be card header image, and give an src of an image. So in this case, I'm going to use a placeholder image.
So with Bootstrap, when we create something, the class, you just fixing the class, and then it gives you the preset, like style with it, and then maybe you can do some custom CSS if you want to, or if you don't, you can basically use the thing that's provided, which is, according to this, is acceptable. This is really good. This is really good.
And now when I refresh that, you'll see the image is loading in quite nicely. It looks quite good. And then that's kind of it for a pretty basic card. Now what about if I were to show you list groups like I showed you before in this course? So I'm going to add a list group below this paragraph here. And to do that, what I'm going to need to do is close out the card body that we've got here. So that's one card body. And then I'm going to start a new one right here. And it might seem a little bit odd, but because we're going to put the list group here, so I'm going to go list group as a comment there. We're going to put a list group here, and we want that to have no padding whatsoever. It should be flush against the edges. So we need to do it outside of that card body. If I refresh now, you'll just see a weird padding thing going on, but not to worry about that for now. So I'm going to create an unordered list, and I'm going to close it off and give that a class of list-group and then list group flush. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a list group as I saw before, and then list group flush will just remove all of the margins around the sides as well as the rounded corners and all of that. And you'll see now when I go and create a list item in here and give it a class of list group item and stick some text in there, so item 1. You'll see our list group looks quite good. It's all flush, there's no rounded corners, and the text lines up with all the other text. And what I can do now is I can go and add some new list items in there, and that's a pretty good looking card in my opinion. So thank you very much for watching. That was just a short one, but as I say, that's pretty much the kitchen sink of cards, and then I'm going to just leave you to explore it on your own. Hey, welcome back to the course. This is episode 7 of the Bootstrap 4 course, and in this one we're going to be looking at tables in Bootstrap 4. Now what I've done is I've already created a table using a pretty standard table layout. So we've got a T head, inside of it we've got a TR, and then inside of that we've got a load of THs, which creates the header, And then we've got a T-body with a row inside of it with a load of table datas, etc., etc. So it's a pretty standard table that we've got here. And in this episode, I'm pretty much just going to walk you through and demo all of the different classes that we can attach to this table to make it look good. So the first thing what we're going to do is we're going to make it not look so ugly, to be honest. So we're going to go ahead and create a class of table. Now, Bootstrap tables are completely opt-in. So you'll see when I add the class of table, it suddenly looks quite good. It's suddenly got lines on it and it's spaced out and it fills the width. It actually looks good. So as I say, they're opt-in, which means that you have to add this class table. I believe in older versions of Bootstrap, you didn't need this and it would style it automatically, but then that will cause all kinds of issues. Let's say you didn't want the styling. So yeah, now you need the class of table whenever you want to use a Bootstrap table. So there's a bunch of other classes that we can add on to this. So for example, table dark, and that does exactly what you think it would do. It just makes the background dark and makes the text light, pretty much. You can also make just the header dark by removing that and going thead class is equal to thead dash dark. And then that makes the header dark and the rest light. And we can also go thead dash light, which makes the header like a light gray to make it sort of stand out a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and remove that though and set it back to the default table. To the table, we can also add table dash striped, which means that we get this nice stripe pattern, which makes it a bit easier for readability if you want to like read along the table and keep track of like where you are height-wise. We can also have table bordered, which adds borders to the table, removes all those lines. Well, it actually keeps the lines, but it adds lines sort of around each field. We can also add table dash hover, which means that whenever you hover over a row, it just highlights that row so that you can sort of keep track better.
Really? Oh. Wow.
Table dash SM just makes the table more compact, so there's less padding around it. And I can also remove table bordered and show you how that looks without the borders. Just like that, it's just compact, takes less height and less width. I'm going to remove table SM and also hover actually as well, because we don't need those. We can also add a color to each row. So let's say we want to highlight a certain row. We can go table dash success, and there it's green, or table danger makes it red, or warning, or primary, just like that. And that's about it. As I say, this wasn't a very complicated video. It wasn't really meant to be. I just wanted to really quickly just walk you through all the different table styles, and all of these are listed in the Bootstrap documentation. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Hey, welcome back to the course. In this episode, we're going to be looking at Bootstrap alerts. Now, these are very similar to what we've had in previous versions of Bootstrap. There's not really going to be too much to show in this video, so let's just get right into it. So to create an alert, we're going to create a div, like most things, and close that off, and give this a class of alert. Now, as I say, this is exactly the same as Bootstrap 2 and 3, so if you come from those, this will all be very familiar. And then we're going to give it a color. So it could be alert dash info, for example, or alert danger, alert warning, whatever, and that gives you all the corresponding colors. So I'm going to go, hello, this is an alert. And very simply, we get our alert down here.
Hello, this is an alert.
It's blue because it's alert info, but if I were to make it alert warning, you'll see
info would be blue.
Would make it red.
Right.
Very simple stuff. Now, what we can also do is we can add a cross icon to close the alert. So once you've read it, you can dismiss it, maybe like a cookie alert where you go, this site contains cookies, or this site uses cookies, and then you close it when you're happy with it. So we could do that by creating a button and giving this a class of close. And a data dash dismiss of alert. Now, when I refresh this, you won't see anything there because the button needs some content. So let's put close. When I click the close button, you'll see the alert disappears. But that does look pretty ugly. It doesn't really fit in there. So what we can use is this ampersand times semicolon, and that is the HTML code for a cross, basically like an X. But obviously you could just use the letter X, but this actually makes sure the font looks good. So there we go, there's our cross, and when we close that, the alert disappears. Exactly what we wanted. There are also a few styles that we can use here. So the first one being the heading. So create a H4 and give this a class of alert heading. And I'm going to say warning, warning, like that. And then I'm going to create a paragraph underneath it just to put some actual message, just to give it a bit more context. Something really is not right. And then we might want to use a helper class, or a utility rather, mb-0. And what this basically does is margin bottom -0. Removes the margin from the bottom. And when we refresh that, there we go. We can also use something like a horizontal rule here if that's what we wanted. All right, I'm going to leave that video here. That was a really quick one, just going through alerts. And I hope to see you in the next one.
Alright, this is really useful. Really useful.
Hey, welcome back to the course. This is going to be another quick episode. We're going to be going through the different types of navigation that you can use in Bootstrap. So we've already been through the navbar, which is like the most common one that's like fixed to the top in one of my first episodes. But there's a few more that we can go through. So all of these sort of alternative navigations start with an unordered list. And they always have a class of nav, and then you can add another class onto it to expand it into the various different types. But for now, we'll just go with the sort of base nav. Then all of the links are created using list items, as you'd expect. And then inside of those list items, we're going to have links. So I'm going to point these to nowhere and close them off. And item 1. So there is our navbar. So not really a navbar, sorry, just a general nav. And you see the link, but right now it's really just nothing fancy. So this navbar also needs to have a class on each list item of nav-item, and then each link will have a class of nav-link. So nav-link, refresh that, you see that sort of changed the padding slightly, and it also removed the underline effect when you hover over it. But right now, not too much to show. So what I'm going to do, create a few more list items just so that we've got something to work with. So item 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there we go. So obviously this isn't really sort of organizing itself nicely. If I make the screen wider, you'll see they go next to each other. But right now it's super, super basic. So there's a few different nav types that we can use. The first one is nav-pills. Now when I refresh this, you're not going to see anything different at all. But what if I add the class active on one of them? So active is like the currently selected button. So let's say I'm currently on page 1, we highlight that. And you see it goes blue, and it's starting to look so much better. It's starting to look a bit less plain. There's a few other types we can use. So nav-tabs, which creates a sort of tab list. And there's a whole jQuery thing that you can use to make these tabs actually function, to display different content. So maybe do AJAX requests or something like that. I'm not going to get into that right now, but I might do a follow-up video where I look at some of the sort of JavaScript parts to Bootstrap. But for now, we're just going to stick with that. Going back to nav-pills, there's something else we can do is nav-fill. And what this is basically going to do is it's going to fill the width of the screen. So instead of bunching them all up, it's going to spread them out and divide the width up equally. We can also disable a link, so maybe we want to show it, but not actually make it work. And you can do this by using the disabled class, which just grays it out so that it looks like you can't sort of press it anymore. I'm going to set this back to tabs now, and I'm going to show you how to use drop-downs. So basically, one of these links will have an arrow next to it, you click on it, and a drop-down will come down. So what we can do is, I'm going to do this for item 2. So this item here. So I'm going to give this class, I'm going to give it another class of drop-down-toggle, which tells Bootstrap that this is going to toggle a drop-down, basically in the name, and then data-toggle is going to be drop-down. And then underneath this line is where we'll create the actual drop-down, and this is just going to be a div with a class of drop-down-menu, and close that off. And then inside of it, we're going to put all of the actual links that will be inside the drop-down menu. So these will be anchors with links to nowhere, and class is going to be drop-down-item. And then I could put my content, so drop down 1. And then I'm going to duplicate this line, so drop down 1, drop down 2, drop down 3. And then now when I refresh that, you'll see the item 2 is now a drop down, and you can select from drop down 1, 2, and 3. We can also add things like div class divider, and then add another link after it, which literally just puts a line there. So maybe you want to separate different functions. So when I do that, oh, sorry, it's actually drop down dash divider. So when I do that, we see there's a gray line there and it separates all the content. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. There's a whole documentation on all of the different little quirks that you can use with navigations. There's so many of them, I just can't really cover them in a video. This just covers all of the common ones.
Okay.
Hi there, this is Per from Scrimba. I just wanted to say well done. Congratulations on completing this Bootstrap 4 course. You should be really proud of yourself for completing this because most people actually don't complete online courses. You, however, while you might be a little bit confused at, but which goes, and that is to understand how CSS works. If you the responsive web design box and CSS grid and taken it all to the next hour's long. And that's not a surprise actually, because his tutorials are so much fun. They're all the way responsive web image right here, and you'll be taken to the responsive web design bootcamp.
All right, let's chill for now. I will go back and then we will do the my car apps. My car